Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. What's up? It's Phil from Fit Will Exposed. In today's exclusive episode, we have a very special guest, Jason Gallant. So I like to bring special guests on the channel every now and then, and he just happens to be the one of today. So for all of you who don't already know, he's a drug-free lifter, which I like a lot. He preaches full body training, and the guy's at an older age, he's still very healthy and still lifting heavy. So I think we have a lot of stuff to learn from him. So welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm glad to
Yeah,
be here.
nice,
Um,
man.
yeah. So what do you want to ask me?
Yeah, so first things first, I just want to tell the audience that you guys don't have to agree with everything Jason says. You guys don't have to agree with everything I say. We're just here to, share our ideas and just take it like a buffet, if you will. You take what you want, you leave what you want, then you walk out, and that's pretty much your experience. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about some general questions on drug-free lifting, and then we're going to travel down the body. We're going to talk about back training, arm training, delts, lower body, etc. And keep in mind that Jason's not a power lifter, he's not a strongman competitor. He's into bodybuilding. So, mind muscle connection, constant tension, all that good stuff.
Mhm.
So if that's the kind of stuff you're into, like body composition and just getting jacked, stay tuned. So, so first off, you mind telling the audience a little bit of your background? Like,
Oh, okay. Background. Well, basically, I started training. The earliest time I stepped in the gym was when I was 5 years old. I trained because my dad was a powerlifter. He was a competitive powerlifter, world-renowned powerlifter. He was eighth strongest in the world in his weight class. He could deadlift 600 pounds at about 165-pound body weight. And so he was super strong. He was athlete of the year in Newfoundland. Actually, that was a long time ago. But I grew up running around a gym while my dad would do squats and deadlifts. And I remember even when we moved out of the country when I was a kid, we moved to Iran because he worked in a paper mill. And when we were in Iran, he had all his weights on the balcony. I don't know how that balcony never collapsed, but he'd be doing outside deadlifts outside. I remember one time he was leaning on the stairs and he was so sweaty from working out in the hot sun. I was leaning on him and I fell down the stairs and had to go get stitches in Iran. So yeah, I had a good hospital visit in Iran when I was 5.
oh wow.
So the weight training is in my blood. It was like something that was so normal to me because I had seen my dad do it my whole life. It was actually boring. But when my friends would come over to the house, they'd be like, "Well, what's your dad doing?" I'm like, "Oh, he's just working out. Let's go play hide and seek or do something else or play video games or whatever, right?" And they'd be like, "No, let's watch your dad work out." And I thought it was just so stupid because it was like it's like watching somebody do something normal, like put on their clothes in the morning or something, or put on their socks, right? Because
Hmm.
it's just such a usual thing. So I didn't realize how important it was in my life until later on when bullying and stuff started happening in school. I was a small kid, all this kind of stuff. So I started weight training in order to offset some of that. And then I was hooked after training for a year or two, and you got enough results. Like I find a lot of people, they lose their motivation because they don't stick to it long enough. But once you actually get some results, then it's a lot easier to find that motivation, as you probably know. Of
So,
course.
so let me get this. So, how old were you when you first started training? Because you said it's been about like three
But
decades.
when I first started training and didn't stop since was when I was 14 years old, and I'm 44 now. So that's 30 years. Yeah.
Okay, so you've been in the game. You've been in the iron game. Like, did you ever take time off, or was it pretty consistent for the most part? Or
No, I took, say, a month off or something because of an injury. Like, say, I herniated a disc in my lower back when I was 18 years old, deadlifting wrong, right? So this is how I learned proper lower back form. Hurt
hmm.
myself. That's how I learned it. And then I dislocated a shoulder in hockey, which was the serious injury. That basically caused me to have to take a month off training and stuff. So, I had a few things like that happened outside the gym that would cause me to have to take time off, but that's it. Otherwise, I stuck to it the whole time. Yeah. Yeah, it
Okay.
became so much part of my identity. It was like I said, it was just like putting on my socks in the morning. It was like, no, I have to train because who am I if I don't, right? Which is how I became a meditation teacher much later on down the road when I dislocated my shoulder and I really had that existential sort of question of who am I if I'm not a bodybuilder, If I'm not Mr.
Hmm.
Biceps anymore, will anybody like me? And I had to go on this whole other journey, right, of meditation and self-reflection. But the fact is that yeah, I've been doing it a long time. I started competing when I was 22. And the reason why was because I was kind of like this bodybuilding bum. I could never really get anything to be a success in my life except for my training. And I was heavily into martial arts and stuff, so those two worlds I was really good at. But as far as making money and stuff, I was never really the best at that age, right? So I was struggling to find my career and everything. And then when I saw this natural bodybuilding contest called the Fraser Valley Naturals that was running locally, and it was a lie detector tested show and urine tested, I said, oh, finally, something I could step on stage with and maybe I'll do
Hmm.
okay at it. And then it'll legitimize, what I've been doing in the gym all this time. So I'd already had 8 years in the gym of consistent training, and so I thought, okay, maybe I'll step on stage and see how that goes. And then that was my first contest, and I won that one in 1996. I won the overall, won best poser, and then I was totally hooked on training for contests at that point. You know?
Nice.
Yeah. So I always thought of myself as a powerlifter slash bodybuilder because I wanted to be a powerlifter, but the thing is I would be a powerlifter without a parallel squat because I don't squat parallel, right? And I would say, you know, I have an immense amount of respect for powerlifters and stuff, but I just didn't have the body type for it because I tried to be my dad, right? And then injured myself based on trying to do the ranges of motion that were kind of necessary in order to compete in that sport. So what I did was I catered the ranges of motion based on what my body type was allowing me to do. And I had a twin brother, and most people don't have that benefit. And I noticed he was kind of moving similarly to me, right? So it's almost like we had this genetic predisposition to move a certain way based on our joint ratios and lengths and all that kind of stuff. And then he'd train one way and I'd train another way, and then I'd see what was working for him and what wasn't working for me or vice versa. And that's how we'd learn what technique was perfect for us. We'd be doing this double-blind placebo all the time. You know, he'd do high reps, I'd do low reps, he'd do high frequency, I'd do lower frequency. And we'd say, oh, you know, this is what happened with your training. You got stronger, I got a little bit bigger. What happened there? What was the truth in that? So we had that benefit.
No,
So yeah,
it's super useful to have. Like a lot of people don't have that luxury, you know, having a twin brother. But let me ask you, like, what got you into bodybuilding? Because you said you're kind of like a power builder, and your father was into powerlifting. What kind of made you gravitate a bit more towards the bodybuilding?
Well, just limitation. You know, I think a lot of things that happen in people's lives are based on limitation, and when you exploit that limitation, it becomes a beautiful work of art. So, for instance, you know, there are some writers. I wrote a few. I wrote one fantasy book, but I wrote a bunch of books as an artistic endeavor, and basically I discovered a lot of great writers along the way. And I used to listen to these guys on podcasts and stuff, and they talk about their successful writing career. And some people would say, "Why'd you become a writer?" And they would say, "Well, I wasn't good at anything else." So how I became a bodybuilder was I just knew that powerlifting wasn't the right thing for me. Although I'd lift heavy with bench press, I'd lift heavy with Romanian type deadlifts or squats and stuff, but I knew the range of motion that I was doing felt right for my body. But when I started to go into the depth, say for, you know, parallel and lower and squats and stuff, it just didn't feel like I was really activating my legs. It felt like my lower back was becoming more my weak link. And I think I also had a predisposition to be more careful with my ranges of motion, because if I went too low in the squat, then I noticed my lower back started to get a lot more work than I wanted. And my lower back had been, I got that herniated disc when I was 18 years old from deadlifting wrong, right? So I had a predisposition of that injury, so I had to also make sure I trained around that injury. So these types of things, once I got an injury or two like that, I was a little bit more skittish about excessive range of motion and weight. And I thought, well, bodybuilding, you could train whether you're training heavy or not. You could actually still compete. Where powerlifting, it's pretty common for a guy before a powerlifting meet to tear his pec or to break a kneecap or tear something off the bone. Like my dad told me all these horror stories of guys training and these powerlifting meets and what would happen to them sometimes. And the fact is, when you're straining at maximum poundages, I mean, it's just like a race car. You're going to blow a gasket at some point. Something's going to happen, right? So I found that was not a good way for me to have a long-term career. That was, in my opinion, that was for me, but based on my body. Like, but I met other guys. They were made of iron. I mean, it was like it didn't matter if you dropped a mountain on them. They didn't get injured. They're like, oh, what was that? You know, a piece of dust just hit me or something. Like it didn't bother them. So
that's probably why a lot of strongman competitors and powerlifters, you know, at the end of their careers, they usually just convert to bodybuilders because they're so snapped up and they're just it's the most logical thing to do, you know.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think because basically when you have a love of the sport, you have a love of lifting weights, you also inherently want to be able to last doing that. And that's the other reason why I stayed as a natural bodybuilder, because I was like, okay, you see, you know, I think Don Long back in the day and Michael Francis and stuff, they were getting these health problems in the 90s being bodybuilders and stuff. And I'm like, man, I love their physiques. Their physiques were unreal. But at the same time, now their careers are totally at an end. Like 1 minute they're 250, 260 pounds, just lean and ripped. And then, you know, 3 months later, they're in the hospital and they lost all their muscle because, you know, their body just couldn't take the stress anymore. So I was thinking, geez, you know, I love training so much. I want to train till I'm 70. I don't want to just train for, you know, 5 years and then say, okay, I'll bow out, right? I want to be able to continue to do this. So that's the other reason, right? But yeah, the reason why I became a bodybuilder was because I wanted to be in this for the long term. And at the same time, my own limitations. I realized I tried lifting super heavy all the time, like I saw with my dad, and I'm like, this just isn't working. And I also had the benefit of watching my own dad. My dad wasn't squatting by the time he was in his 30s anymore. You know, his knees would be hurting him and stuff like that. And sometimes there's some life circumstances that contributed to that, like he had a car accident or so. And
Exactly.
he was a policeman, and some guy imagine the luck. A guy had a heart attack at the steering wheel. My dad was a policeman. He was just driving through the intersection on a green light, and the guy just hit him because this guy had a heart attack at the wheel. So anyway, that caused some sort of inflammatory problems with his knees, and then at the same time squatting deep and everything. And I thought, you know, doing the maximal poundage thing, if my dad's only lasting 15, 20 years of intense weight training, maybe there's something that he did wrong here. So I was trying to be a little bit more conservative with, you know, how he trained, right? So, and then when I snapped myself up a couple times, I'm like, oh, okay, how did I do this? And I would kind of go back and reverse engineer the whole process of how did I screw myself up, right? And usually it was when I was lifting too heavy or trying to push too heavy too often. That was, I think that's a genius thing that you do. You switch rep ranges up because the higher reps allow you to hit those different muscle fibers and allow you to pump blood in the area, help your recovery, and then you do the heavy weights. And, you know, I think it's very important to do that. Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of like full range of motion and stuff like that, when people go on your channel, the first thing they hear is train the muscles, not the joints, right?
Yeah.
And I know that you're a big advocate of not necessarily full range of motion, but from what I'm seeing, more like full range of tension for your particular build, you know, because some certain people have certain injuries or, you know, anthropometry related issues where a certain range of motion just feels more natural for them and they're going to get more results for their particular, you know, situation. So,
Yeah.
you mind explaining that?
Yeah, okay. Well, if you look at a basketball player, if he's going to go slam dunk, he doesn't squat ass to the grass in order to get the most amount of power to jump up and slam dunk that basketball, right? You know, there's a certain range that he has the optimal amount of power and strength in order to leap. And that would be the ideal torque curve area or ideal place that I would say is the ideal range of motion for the maximum amount of strength. So for me, I'd rather work in that range instead of stretch the crap out of the joint in order to, you know, do something supposedly correct. Now, I believe in stretching the muscle, and I believe in full range for a certain muscle group. I just don't believe in full range for the joint, because you know that if you sit on your heels all relaxed, or do a yoga posture, or say you do the splits on the ground, that's a different type of flexibility than active flexibility. And I think a lot of people mix that up. They think, oh, if I can do the splits, then why not put 500 pounds on my back while I do the splits, and then that should be a good idea, right? But at the same time, that's injuries just waiting to happen. Anybody that does jiu-jitsu would also say the same thing. You don't relax your arm and then have somebody put tension on it at the same time, right? That's how you break your arm. So the range of motion that I'm saying is that it's going to be different for each person, but once you start to notice that the tension is switching more to the joint than the muscle, like there's an exponential amount of tension that's transferring to the insertions of the muscles as well as the joint itself, then there's a good chance that you might be, you know, maybe you don't have a flexibility, maybe you have a flexibility issue, but if you don't have a muscular flexibility issue, then there's just a joint thing going on. And at that point, you're just basically risking injury. So I find where a lot of people get mixed up is they look at one person move a certain way and they say they've got to move the exact same way as that person. But the thing is, each person has their own genetic deviations. Like your femur length to your tibia length will be different from person to person. And if you watch two people run down the street, each person's gait will be totally different. But nobody goes out there and says, hey, listen, you're running wrong because, you know, you don't look like my buddy Joe when he runs, you know, so you're running all wrong, right? So the thing is, we do have this law of individuality. And Fred Hatfield, Dr. Squat, talked about that. He actually did talk about it. There was the law of individuality that was a very firm law that he had set out. And the thing is that each person's joints will move differently. And there is sometimes I read something somewhere, and I wish I could have the link or whatever, but the differences between some people's hips. Some people's hip joint itself is actually structured differently. There's a couple different ways that it can be structured, and that will change the way the joint moves. So this will also influence your range of motion. So basically what I do is I use a range of motion that keeps the tension on the muscle, but once I start to notice that in order to do a range of motion, I've got to take the tension off that particular muscle and then transfer it to another system altogether, and perhaps maybe round the back in order to do it, then I say that range of motion is excessive and it's not working, right? So everybody knows about the butt wink, right? If you do the butt wink when you're squatting, then that means you've gone too low in some cases, or you don't have the flexibility. Now, the standard sort of thing on the internet is everybody saying, oh, the person just is not flexible, they should be able to do it. Well, ask yourself, why can't they do it? Sometimes they can't do it because they don't want to bring their knees farther over their toes. Well, why is that? Maybe their knee joint is in jeopardy when their knee travels too far in front of their toes, or it starts to cave in or something like that. And so in that case, you have to really ask yourself, is the risk versus reward worth it? You know, and depending on, again, your injury history, or depending on how your knees are built, depending on how they're put together, because some people have more sensitive knees than others, it might not be the best thing for them to bring their knees way over their toes just so they can stay more straight up and down and bring
I
their hips down
understand.
further. You know,
You're
so it's
basically you're basically saying like certain people could pull it off, but like
yeah.
depending on injury history, anthropometry, and stuff of that nature, it's not everybody should be going out to grass. Like,
Yeah. I think that some people should and some people shouldn't, and I think it's a matter of if you have to really connect with your body, right? You're connecting and you're saying, okay, where is this tension, and can you increase your flexibility? Yes, you can, but there's a point to where the flexibility of the muscle has already been increased, but you can't change the actual structure of the joint itself and how it functions. And I think only through serious self-reflection and serious just being with the body and going through these ranges of motion and sometimes snapping something up will you find that limitation. Yeah. So
okay,
I
so
see.
let me
Go ahead.
go
No,
on.
go ahead.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was gonna ask you this next question. So, why stay natural? Because that's like obviously in YouTube, especially like a lot of people are choosing to go a different route, with their fitness goals. And what stands out from a lot of from like my channel and like Alex's channel and even yours, not to put us all in the same bucket or anything, but like
Yeah, yeah.
why did you decide to stay natural for 30 years? Or I don't know if you've done something before, but like
No, I haven't.
for the
No.
most part,
Yeah, no, I've
yeah.
stayed natural my entire life. Yeah, no, the reason why is because obviously every young guy when he starts training and sees, like, I used to work in the bars and stuff, and of course there'd always be somebody I'd know that would go the unnatural route, and I'd be training 6, 7, 8 years, already, and then I'd see this guy within 3 months just pass me and all of a sudden look like he had been training an extra decade longer than me, right? And I'd
Yeah,
be like,
yeah.
shit, like, so I had these experiences, right? So obviously I investigated, what is this whole drug world about at a certain age? And I talked to my dad about it, and he told me all the horror stories of what had happened to some guys that he trained with and stuff, and how the joints became more brittle under certain circumstances, and how these career-ending injuries sometimes were the result. Not always, but sometimes that can happen. So unlike a lot of people, I got educated about the horror stories at an early age instead of just looking at the glorification on Instagram, right? So I find right now there's this glory about people see the result, but they don't actually see the long-term repercussion because they're only looking at somebody over a period of a year or two. They're not looking at them for over, 2 decades or something. So
Yeah.
I actually listened to my dad. I was lucky. I had a good dad. I actually listened to him. And he just told me, he said, listen, if you're going to make $1 million a year, maybe it's worth the risk, but you're definitely risking your health. And because he could share all these stories of personal, real experiences that he had with all these different people, it really helped me make the decision, right? And the thing is, my brother actually was going to school for biochemistry and became a naturopathic doctor. So he was always the scientific mind out of the two of us. So him and I would have intense discussions about what is this whole other world about, what are the repercussions and stuff. So he would actually do research and feed it back to me about the stuff that can happen. And one thing that was told to me that really prevented me from making a decision towards any pro-hormones or any drugs whatsoever was that there was a few different things that my brother told me about when the hormone system is changed in the body. It creates a long-term effect where those hormones never come up to normal again. So this explained one phenomenon that was going on, because I'd be training and I'd be getting some results, and then I'd have a guy that was an unnatural guy, and basically he'd be looking at me and he'd be saying, "There's no way you're natural because you're getting results from your training." Well, the reason why I'm saying this is because he wasn't getting any results because he had messed his hormones up. So his hormones weren't working anymore, right? So he had to constantly medicate just to be normal, and then he's looking at me like I was the unnatural guy. So I would see this kind of stuff. So I was like, this kind of yo-yo effect, I don't want to be dependent on something. It's almost like being dependent on a drug dealer for my fulfillment and happiness in life. And the only thing that I was successful at that point in my life was weight training. And I didn't want to mess with that. I didn't want to, lose the success that I had already gotten. And I didn't want to develop a dependency, right? So as a human being, you're dependent on food, you're dependent on water, you're dependent on air. I didn't want to add one more dependency on that whole thing.
Exactly. It's
And it's like,
another crutch.
yeah, and I'd see these guys that get depressed, like where I'd see a guy like he'd look like like a god, like he'd be like Thor, the thunder god, just all of a sudden incarnating, right beside me. He'd look awesome with abs and everything, And then about 2 or 3 months later, his boobs would start to sag. He'd end up getting like gynecomastia and stuff, and then he'd have to go get surgery on that, and he'd get this small, skinny fat. I knew this other guy too. He had a cottage cheese belly. Like he was a skinny little guy, but it's like his estrogen levels went through the roof, and then he had all these weird side effects he had to deal with for years. So I'd see all these guys. I'd actually watch. I guess they say a smart man learns from his own mistakes, but a wise man learns from others. I was actually looking at other people and seeing what was happening to them. Not just from the 1 month or the 2 months. I was saying, okay, after the period of 6 months to 2-3 years, what's really going on with this guy? And a decade later, most of those guys weren't even training anymore. A decade later, most of them weren't even training. A lot of them, they had career-ending injuries or certain things that just were, basically they became blockages. Like their hormone levels were all over the place. They were depressed. They couldn't get a pump. They couldn't recover. So lots of stuff like that. So I said, hey, I don't want any part of that. I want to be able to train for the rest of my life, And that's really why I stayed natural. I wanted to say, okay, I earn this, and that means I can reproduce it again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think I don't know, me personally, that's not the kind of message I want to promote on my channel. I don't want to tell teens, get on drugs. It's not really the message I want to preach. But the reality is that they're out there, and there's at least 70% of YouTubers are on something,
Mm-hmm.
And even though they're not promoting it, they're still advertising in a certain way because that's the kind of look they have, So they're kind of influencing people. I don't even know where I'm trying to go at with this, but what I'm trying to say is, as far as drugs are concerned, my biggest problem is when you have all these drug users looking down at naturals and with this kind of look and mentality, you're soft because you're not juicing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I remember I trained at a hardcore gym back in the day, and I was personal training there at the time, and there was this massive, 80% of the guys in that gym were on something, right? So they're bench pressing 500 pounds for reps, it was regular thing. You'd walk in that gym, there'd be a guy with 8 plates on the squat up and down, and I was competing in the natural universe at the time, and I was going to Las Vegas, and I was in magazines and stuff, and then they'd always be like, hey, Jason, they'd call me all sorts of names, you a pussy, when are you going to actually get on something? They'd be looking down at me like somehow I was an idiot, right? Why would you try to make this so hard on yourself by staying natural? It's like they were the devil on my shoulder trying to...
Exactly.
But I'm I'd see them, they'd inflate and then shrink down and then inflate and then shrink down. I'm like, who wants that kind of drama, right? I don't want that. I want to be able to keep what it is that I'm gaining. And I know what you're saying. There was lots of guys that would look down on me and say, you don't know what you're talking about because you don't have 21-inch arms and stuff like that. But of course, they weren't, playing the same game I was. My thing was chicken breast and rice and sleep and then training frequently, and then they were doing something totally different, and they're training, funny enough, they train once a week on a body part or once every 2 weeks, and that was more than enough, because they were relying on hormones to do all the work. So the funny thing is, when they were training people, they didn't really know what they were doing when it came down to training. All they knew was what hormones did, but training, they had no idea about the science of training. So
they just know drug protocols and
if somebody wants to learn how to train, the last thing you want to do is learn from a drug guy. The last thing. Most of the drug guys don't know how to train. They know a little bit about how to train, but that's like a by the way. It's almost like something that happens along with this major thing, this monster in the room that's really causing most of the results, right? Whereas a natural, as you know, you have to stimulate your hormone system by lifting heavy with compounds or doing certain things that way. When you're training itself, that's how you stimulate that hormones and also eating right. But you can't, I used to, like I said, I used to see guys that weren't natural. They'd be doing tequila shooters every night of the week, and their physique would be changing right in front of me, and this monster, and then getting veins and everything, and they were just drinking alcohol and doing whatever, right? It's like it's almost like the whole science and physics and laws of physics of how the body functions didn't apply to them because they had something totally different going on.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that drug users don't know what they're talking about, but I would say that there's a lot of them who kind of just take the shortcut earlier on, and but there are some who pretty much quote unquote reach their genetic potential. Take a guy like P. Rubish, he reached I think a 700 or 750 deadlift drug free, and it's how much are you really gonna add from there, drug, but he reached really close to the ceiling, So those are the kinds of drug users who are self-admitted users I respect because they really reach close to the potential and then they go on and stuff,
No, and I totally agree with you on that because the thing is there is the type of person that learned naturally how training works with their body. They took time to do that before they interact with this other variable, and before they,
Yeah, then they took the next step after that.
Injected this new variable, no pun intended. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
They actually learned how to train first, and yeah, for sure. But I find a lot of the kids now, they're not even. I mean, I've seen kids with like just a year ago in my gym, just walking in with like abscesses on their shoulders and stuff. Like they have no idea how to train, but they just basically put drugs in their system and then do whatever, and then watch their body grow. So. Yeah, I mean, you can't really have a blanket statement towards anything. There's no absolute blanket statement, but I would say as a general rule, a person that's been training drug-free will be better at teaching somebody how to train drug-free.
Yeah, for sure.
You'll
be able to relate to that person more.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you though is, what do you think about, because you're past 40 years old, right? So you're 43, 44?
Yep, 40.
How's training now? Like, are you still making progress? And what's your take on people who say after you reach 40 years old, your testosterone levels start declining? Like, what's your whole experience with training, like in a bodybuilding fashion, at somewhat of an older age?
Yeah,
You're not old, but like you're.
Yeah, well, I haven't been neutered yet, so that's good news, Like,
how's like the progress? Like, are you still like packing on? Like, are you still able to like pack on like? Do you still have an inch to pack on your arms like yet, or do you think you're pretty much tapped out?
Is, I'm basically always searching what the limitation is. I'm always doing that. And the thing is that I read books a long time ago called Autobiography of a Yogi, and there were different mystical books, about meditation and these spiritual abilities that would manifest in people's lives. And I do firmly believe that your body will follow your mind. And if your mind is in a stress state for a long period of time, that will have a burden on the body. Everybody knows stress causes cortisol release, and that causes, a catabolic response in the body, all that sort of thing. So here's the thing. When I was training, I was at my peak. I'd say my peak at about 2006. That's when I was my biggest and leanest all combined. I was around 212, and I was pretty lean. I looked pretty good. And
did you know what the body, could you mind giving the audience some of your body, like, measurements and body fat if you knew it?
I was 5'8". My arms were about 18 and a half, 18 and 3/4. And I was about 10% body fat, probably, about that.
For real?
Yeah, 10%, 10, 11, maybe 11, but I looked great. But what happened was I got sick and tired of the whole bodybuilding thing as far as competing, because in naturals, there was nothing to really look forward to, right? I won the BC Bodybuilding Federation contest, which is an IFBB type show. And I won that because I had a bunch of guys in the gym make fun of me and say, "Oh yeah, whatever, you're not a real bodybuilder. You just train for that stupid natural bodybuilding crap. You wouldn't win a real show, right?" So they're like saying all this shit to me, right? So I'm like, you know what? I just might compete in a local show just to show you guys, because first of all, it's really convenient. I don't have to spend $2,000 or $3,000 on a hotel and flight and everything, right? And meals and everything. So this is great. I can just walk out my door and go compete. That's a really convenient thing. So I said, okay, screw you guys. I'm going to go compete. I'll show you, right? So I went and I competed. I won my division at the first show. I made some adjustments to my diet for the BCs, and then I ended up beating the same guy that beat me at the first show, and I beat him. And I won the overall, got best poser and everything. So I'm qualified for the Canadian Nationals as a natural guy in IFBB for the rest of my life. So
that's great. And that was in 2006, you said?
2002, I actually won. I actually started improving even after that. But the fact is that I guess what I'm trying to say is that what I did was, after I competed that show, I said, geez, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go from here as a natural athlete? There's really no stage I can go to. There's the Natural Universe, which I got third in the pros. I got third in the heavyweight division in Natural Universe in 2001. And then I got a couple of magazine articles written about me and stuff like that. But you make a few $100s for a front cover of a magazine, you'd make $1,000 for an article, or $500. So there was no real money, right? So I had to really make a decision to move down to LA if I wanted to make a career out of this. And I didn't really want to leave all my friends and family just for the sake of a possibility that I might have a career, right? So I said, okay, it's really not that important to me. So I started to get into another sport called hockey, which is the whole Canadian virus. You know what I mean? The Canadian problem. I got into playing hockey, and I didn't know how to skate very well, but I was super fast because of all the squats and lunges I had been doing for so many years. So yeah, that's how I ended up injuring myself, was basically, blowing a tire, going out of control. And so I got focused on hockey for 10 years. So my whole point is that I got focused on a cardio type sport. So I started burning off muscle, and I weight trained to assist my hockey for about 8 to 9 years, instead of actually focusing on muscle mass gains. So now the last 3 years, I've been focusing more on bodybuilding and bringing back the muscle mass. And my physique, if you look back at my videos from 3 years ago to a year ago to a year and a half, you can see that my physique has slowly started to change. And that's mostly my diet. My diet has changed, and my activity has changed, where it's mostly just weight training. No more. I'm not playing hockey or anything, right? So it doesn't get in the way of burning off muscle and stuff. So obviously, big arms don't help your stick handling skills and stuff like that, right? So yeah. So basically, that's one of the reasons why I lost some size for periods of time, but it wasn't because of age, you know. So the last 3 years, I've still been making progress, but I'm basically getting my gains back from what I had before. But it's like I have to train my body to say, okay, now remember, you're a weight training body now. You don't need to be cardio, right? So it's almost like whatever you tell the body to adapt to, that's what it will adapt to. But I'm not having trouble for it to be adapting. It's adapting quite fine. You know, the biggest thing I've had to get over is just the dislocating shoulder and stuff like that, to work around that sort of stuff. But it wasn't an age thing. It was more a mileage thing, as they say. I think Indiana Jones said, sorry, I'll do this. I think Indiana Jones said in one of his films, he said, it's not the age, it's the mileage, right? So sometimes, you know, have a few car accidents or injuries in your sport. Sometimes that can limit your training a little bit. But I don't find that I'm having any trouble as far as making some gains anyway at this age.
Yeah. No, I personally think that the whole genetic ceiling, or what's it called, genetic potential. I personally think it's a myth. I think that what ends up happening is that you reach your testosterone just starts going down at a certain age, which is true. You do start losing muscle, and I think that's just what happens. And then you start to just look slightly less impressive every year, and then at some point you're just trying to maintain all the muscle you have, but like. When people say that you have a genetic potential, I think like come on, like you don't reach your certain genetic potential after like 20 years. Like let's say you've been training 20 years from 20 to 40, and you never trained your neck before. Are you really gonna say your genetic potential is tapped out? Well, there's another muscle group, which is your neck, which if you never trained it before, you haven't maxed that out yet. You haven't maxed out your grip strength yet. If you haven't been training your calves, you haven't maxed that out yet. There's so many muscles in the human body. People say that you're tapped out, it kind of like it gets to me a bit.
Yeah, well, yeah, it just depends on what you've trained and what you haven't trained, for sure. Yeah, I mean, if you haven't trained something, of course you wouldn't hit your genetic potential there, right?
That's the thing,
Yeah.
And it's like, but there's so many muscles in the human body. So it's like for people to say, "Oh, you reach your genetic potential," it's like, Anyways.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying.
A bit off topic, but
No, it's all right. It's good. But I think it boils down to that open mind we're talking about. When you have an open mind, then you are always looking at what else can be done instead of what should be done because somebody else tells you. You're actually saying, okay, what have I not discovered about my own self? Like this whole bodybuilding thing can be an intense meditation path in some way because you're always like having this relationship with your body and saying, okay, what is it that I've worked? What is it that I haven't? What have I discovered? What is it do I truly know? And what is it that I think I know? And I think that's why it's good not to put limits on yourself, because when you put limits on yourself, you're saying you know what the possibility is, but how do you really know? I've never been 44 before and trained, and I've never been 50 before and trained, and never been 70. Like there's going to be different realities that present themselves at these different ages, but I notice my strength's going up more than anything. I limit myself as far as I don't push too hard into the heavy weights when, I can feel that, okay, I don't want to tweak my back today or something, which is what everybody does. It's intelligent at the gym. They don't push through stuff they don't want to push through. And I noticed that there's certain obstacles I've had to overcome because of, like I said, the injury history from hockey and stuff. But it's not the age thing. The age thing, I think a lot of people, they get kind of stuck on that. But the age thing isn't really what's limited me. It's more about some stuff that basically happened through accidents and stuff, but it isn't the training. And to push home my point, a guy named Carmi Smith, I believe his name was Carmi Smith, at the World Naturals in 2000, he won at 50 years old, and he looked unbelievable. And he beat a lot of good guys. Like, I didn't even place in that show. And I mean, this guy looked unbelievable, like veins and size and everything. And his name was Carmi Smith. So the thing is, as a natural athlete, your hormones will be fine for a long period of time. But I think a lot of guys that are looking for, the whole hormone excuse, if you look at their lifestyle, they're doing a lot of stuff in their lifestyle that's actually killing their hormones. Anything from mineral deficiencies to high amounts of stress, can absolutely totally destroy your hormone levels in your body, right? And I think that a lot of people in this society right now, they deal with an incredible amount of stress. Like there's so much stuff going on in people's lives and stuff. And I think that if people looked at their life more holistically, they'd be better off than looking to hormone therapy, right?
Understand.
Yeah, how to manage stress, Yeah.
So let's start breaking down the body parts now because I think that's
Okay.
what most people want to like. So we'll do it like blitz style, just like
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
and so let's start with the back, right?
Okay.
What's your take on the Yates row? Because I noticed in your training, I see you incorporating quite a bit,
Yeah, I never
and
looked at it as Yates row. I think it was called my lower back is weak row. You know what I mean? That's
that's what
that's
you call it?
well, that's what because I always rode like that because when I bent over more, I noticed my lower back would be hitting failure more than actually my lats, and then of course my upper back would start to get hit. And I know it seems counterintuitive because when you're bent over, you should be stretching the lat more, because the hand comes out more. There's more of an angle. But at the same time, I found that the exponential amount of pressure on the lower back wasn't actually giving me any more results in the lats. And of course, you'd have to use lighter based on the limitation of the lower back. So I wasn't able to pull the same amount of weight. And when you can pull heavier weight on the back just seems to respond so much better when you're using heavier weight to lift the weight, right? I found that also I wanted to row to the waist, not to the chest, right? Because if you row to the waist, you're using that big lat muscle in order to basically harness that back. And if you're bent right over, then sometimes you're pulling right to the chest, and now you're using the upper back, like the rear delts and the upper traps and stuff like that. And I found not only is the lower back coming into play more, but now I'm not really hitting my lats. I'm not feeling my lats when I'm doing this. I'm actually feeling more my upper back as the weak link. So it boils down to the weak link principle. Whatever it is that is the thing that hits failure first in that exercise is what you notice will get the most results. So that's where the 8 row came into place. That's where I never called it the 8 row, but it's just barbell row to me. That's just the way I've always rowed, right? So it made sense to me when I saw Dorian Yates do that at some point as well. Because the thing is, some people when they train back, and you might have noticed this, you can see some guys online. When they row, they don't focus on pulling the shoulder blades back. They focus on pulling back a little bit like this, but mostly they're focusing on where their elbow is. Like they're just trying to bring that elbow right back to get that full range of motion. So they end up with these awesome developed delts in some cases, but their lats aren't really developed because their delts are hitting failure long before their lats do. So it's a matter of finding that perfect sweet spot so that your back hits failure first, not your delts. So some people think you have to touch your waist with the bar and everything, and I think that this will vary from person to person depending on your dimensions. But for me, I don't touch my waist with the bar. I'm still about that far away from the waist, but I'm pulling more. This is the focus of the pull. It's not about how far back my arms come. It's more about pulling those shoulders back, right? And so I think that when people really focus on what the back really does, which is the retraction, they automatically get more results, and they're not necessarily so focused on the angle of going over and pulling right to the chest and stuff, So yeah.
So speaking of the lats, what's your take on some tips that you could maybe give the audience on how to engage the lower lats when doing one-arm dumbbell rows?
Well, one-arm dumbbell rows, I find that doing I like to do two-arm dumbbell rows. Actually, that's my favorite. I love dual dumbbell rows at the same time. I find that twisting and stuff like that, sometimes when guys twist when they do the one-arm row, they basically start to bring in those rear delts again and stuff. But more than anything, what you want to do is you want to bring the shoulder down towards the waist and stick that chest out, right? And I find sometimes with the one-arm row, the problem is with the one-arm row with a lot of people is that they can twist a bit, and because of this twisting, then they don't focus on this part. They focus more on the twisting, And that's what kills them. That's usually what keeps them from getting good back development from that. Now, they might get strong. I'm not saying they won't get strong. They'll get development in other areas, but they might not get lat development from that. And the whole thing about the lat is that you want to stay square to the floor and pull right to the waist like this. And if you're not able to stay square to the floor, then that means you're twisting. And if you're twisting, well, guess what? That's not the lat anymore. That's the rear delt, right? Because I used to have, when I was 18, I was doing one-arm rows, and I had these wicked rear delts. Like I had this awesomest rear delts, but my back was not developing when I was 18, when I was doing one-arm rows. And that was why. Of course, it took me many years to figure that out, but that's what happened there.
So what's your take on, barbell row variations? You got the pronated, supinated, you got the neutral, if you use a trap bar. What's your take on back activation with these different grips?
Yeah, I think it's good to try them all, try different ones. But I think supinated, and I do supinated from time to time, but I find supinated, of course, is more dangerous on the bicep tendons and stuff if you just have one of those moments where you try to pull too much with the bicep instead of the back. But at the same time, supinated I find does engage more the rear delt for me. I don't know why that is, but somehow I feel a little bit more rear delt when I engage that.
Probably because of the external rotation.
Yeah. So it does change something for sure. I like the overhand though mostly, and I think I have never tried the trap bar one, but I can see how that would be pretty awesome too. The trap bar bent over row, I can see that would be a pretty good variation. I've never used that
Hmm.
one, but I can see like I like this grip the best to tell you the truth. Instead of pronated, I actually like this grip the best because it seems to allow the retraction of the shoulders better for some reason. Whereas when you're like this, you may be engaging the internal rotators in the rotator cuff and stuff, so that might be actually changing the dynamic of how your chest extends or retracts. Yeah, but yeah, no,
Okay.
I think those would be good variations to try. I'm not really, I'm not really. I guess you could say the jury's out on it. I think I'd be open to trying all of them and just basically experimenting with them and seeing. But if something becomes like you have to use super lightweight, I think there's a point to where if you have to use super lightweight because of a different variation in the grip, and just the discomfort in your wrist and stuff becomes a problem. Obviously, you're not going to really challenge the back. You're going to be challenging other parts of your body, right?
Hmm. Let's talk about the pullover because I don't know if you know I'm pretty sure you know the Nautilus Pullover
Yeah, yeah.
machine, which
Mm,
is a great machine, but most gyms don't have it.
mm,
So
mm.
most people they resort to doing like the dumbbell pullover with their upper back across the bench, but there's a lot of people who actually don't feel the lats working on that movement. So, and I know you're a big advocate of like constant tension. So, what are some tips for people out there, for some of the viewers who can't really feel much lat growth from that movement?
I think that if you're going to be doing that move, I don't do that movement a lot, but if you're going to be doing the movement, uh, and the reason why is because of dislocating shoulder and stuff. I find it just extension. I don't want to pop the shoulder out by going too far back, but I still do it from time to time. But the problem a lot of people do is that they don't bring their elbows in. If you bring your elbows in, that makes all the difference in the world of whether you activate your lat or not. And I find a lot of times
Okay,
guys are doing this the whole time,
it's too
and
flared out.
yeah, and remember that the lat is an internal rotator, so it rotates in. So you want to stretch a muscle group in order to hit it, right? So it makes sense to bring the elbows in to stretch that muscle group when you come down, and then when you come up, then if you rotate in, that's okay. But you want to make sure that when you're down here, that you're pulling that elbow in as much as possible in order to stretch the lat. So that's one
Interesting.
thing. Now the other thing, when people come up, you know how it is. They finish the movement, take a rest up at the top and stuff. That's no constant tension, right? The tension's on, and then boom, it's off, right? On, then off. So what you want to do is I just come up to here and then right down again, and to stay more in that stretch state. And
Okay,
I think that would be a much better way.
so you're a big advocate of stopping the dumbbell at around eye level
Yeah,
or
yeah, or
forehead level around.
forehead level, or maybe a little bit back. Yeah. So make sure don't stop. Like only stop when there's still tension on it, but don't go when the tension leaves. You don't want to go so
Of
much so
course,
that
of
the
course.
tension's gone. Yeah. So yeah, that
I'm
constant
a big advocate of constant tension too. Like a lot,
yeah.
I think a lot of people think it's for sissies, but you feel it so much better, and like you
I
feel
don't
it throughout the
understand.
whole range of motion. And
I don't understand why anybody would say it's for sissies because the thing is, if anything, just locking your joints and sitting there, and just so you don't have to, so you're avoiding muscular pain. That seems like more of a sissy movement
no,
to me,
exactly. If
right?
anything, you're resting. If
Yeah,
you bring the
resting.
dumbbell to like your chest level, like there's no tension there whatsoever. From the
Yeah,
chest to like the mouth, there's nothing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But there's really like once you bring it to like your eye level, forehead level, there's isometric tension. Then you already feel the lats before you even move them, and then you
Totally.
start to
Yeah.
set. But what I want to ask you is, there's different ways that people do the dumbbell pullover. You see some guys where they have um, kind of like their traps on the bench and like half the head is sticking out, and then
Mm-hmm.
you have some other guys where they have the whole upper back on the bench with the whole head kind of like sticking out the bench.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
what's the big difference in your opinion? Like, and what do you recommend? What do you do?
Well, usually I just put my upper neck on the bench and my head is on the bench itself. But basically, if I'm using 90-pound or 100-pound dumbbells and I'm coming back like this, if I'm too far over the bench, I'm just going to flip right over like Jack Tripper in Three's Company. You know what I mean? Just my legs will come up. So I find, yeah, you're right. Some guys they'll like say this is the bench. I don't know. Can you see this? Okay. And then they basically lay the middle of their body across. And of course, then when they start using the dumbbell over here, they're fighting that counterbalancing, right? So you want to make sure that your upper body's here, or at least your head and stuff, so that way when the dumbbell comes back this way, you're not feeling like you have to balance your body at the same time, right? So it's about finding that sweet spot for sure. Yeah, yeah. You don't want to be having your waist on the bench, obviously, right? So
Sorry about that.
yeah, you flipped out on me. Where'd you go?
Sorry about that. Nah, sorry about that. Okay, we're pretty good for the back. We're just gonna ask a handful of questions for every body part. Let's talk about the arms, upper arms, right? You with me?
There, are you there?
It
Sorry,
cut off for a quick second.
Okay, sorry, Skype just blipped out on us. Sorry about that.
It's
Okay,
perfect, perfect.
so
Let's drop it a bit down towards the arms right now, okay?
okay,
We'll
yeah.
go to like the delts. Okay, so people are always saying that the close grip bench press, it's it's the best tricep builder of all time. Personally, I think it has its place, but I think a lot of people who are especially more like torso dominant tend to just feel in their chest and delts, especially front delts.
Mm.
So, what's your opinion on how to improve the mind muscle connection with the triceps when doing close grip presses? Like, are you a big advocate of like, for example, some trainers like to say, don't make it touch your chest. You stop a few inches short.
Mm.
Some people say, make your elbow literally touch your lats and obliques, so they're really tucked. Like, how do you make people feel it more?
Yeah, I think it's going to change from person to person always, right? I mean, it's totally going to be the case because depending on how your arm is built and how your shoulder structure and everything will depend on what is dominant and what isn't. But because here's the thing, I've tried keeping the elbows in, and I notice I do feel the triceps there, but I have to push more like this, instead of like that in order to get the delts out, right? So basically, that's why on a Smith machine, sometimes when there's an angle moving almost like a decline, I find doing the close grip bench with the elbows in works better, right? When it comes down to that. But on a free weight bench, for free weight close grip, I find that if I flare the elbows and just come down 90 degrees at the elbow and then just up constantly and keep that tension on the triceps, I find I get more of a tricep burn, and the triceps tend to hit failure faster. Now, the other variation that I have done is touching my chest, and I was doing this in some videos that I did 3 months back. And I find that because you're bringing the arms back so far, and I think this has something to do with the shoulder girdle, something to do with the shoulder sitting in the girdle differently, you will activate a different part of the tricep. So I think it's good to do different variations. I don't know if there's just one way. The main way I stick to is elbows flared and just up and down like this. But sometimes I will vary it up by coming back even farther, touching my chest, and then coming up as well. And I notice that I hit a different level of failure in a different part of the tricep, right? So I think each exercise has different variations that will really bring tremendous benefit for different areas. So I don't think there's just one way. I think that's why people debate so much. I think because they're like, oh, there's this one way that worked for me. It's like, yeah, that did work for you. And then there's this way. And yeah, that also will work for you. Try both. Try all of them and see which one. But your point is, if the delta sitting failure first, obviously that's not the right way for you to hit a tricep workout, right? If your delta hitting failure first your chest, you know what I'm saying? So if you're one of those guys that notice that, then I'd say try flaring your elbows, try bringing your elbows in. Changing the elbow position can do tremendous differences in what gets active. Changing your grip. Some guys, they come way too close, like they're like this and they're just killing their wrists, right? You have to just go, to about above your shoulders. You don't have to go so narrow in order to actually activate the tricep in a lot of cases, right? So you just want to go as wide as you need to be able to comfortable on the wrist, but at the same time, you want to make sure that every, degree of angle that changes in the elbow, there's about, half a degree maybe around the shoulder joint. You know what I'm saying? So there's basically more movement or more angle change in the elbow than there is in the shoulder joint, and therefore you're going to get more tricep work. But a lot of guys,
I like that answer.
Yeah, they do this, and then just a little eat, and this, and then eat. I wonder why the triceps can failure. It's like, no, you're using so much chest. How can your chest not be dominant in that exercise then? So yeah. So
Let's
I
talk
find.
about.
Go ahead.
You're finishing, or?
No, I just find a lot of guys that basically they say you have to keep the elbows in and you have to press and stuff, and they're doing this sort of thing, and they're coming down all the way. But sometimes when they're coming down all the way, they're actually just really stretching that shoulder out.
No, I understand. Yeah.
So it depends on the person. Like some people, it'll actually help them activate the tricep, but other people will just stretch the crap out of their delt, and they'll get more delt development from that. So that's the variation that we talked about. That's why personal trainer is kind of important, right? So a trainer can help you find the truth in each individual exercise and see which one's the right variation for you.
So let's talk about the chin-ups now. Because now people are saying that the chin-up is the best bicep builder on the planet, which I kind of understand where they're coming from, but I personally don't see it, at least for me. But at the same time, like you look at gymnasts, you look at especially gymnasts, it's a great testimonial right there. Like, calisthenics athletes, guys who just don't even touch weights whatsoever. They're just training in parks, Like clearly there are tons of people out there who are building like huge biceps without any curls, So
Yeah.
what's your take on how to improve the bicep activation when doing chin-up variations or pull-ups?
Okay, one thing about the gymnasts that if we're going to talk about bicep development in gymnasts, they don't just chin up. Okay, they're not doing chin ups. If you watch them when they do the cross, like say they basically say the rings are above them, and then they bring their feet up and they stick them back, and so they end up in a position like this, where their arms are like this, where the elbows are behind them. It's like an incline curl, and they hang like this, right? They hang like this.
For sure, for sure.
That is a stretched position for the long head of the bicep, and it's an unbelievable bicep developer. And that, in my experience, is the best bicep developer for most people. And Charles Poliquin also said this, and it's true. And that guy's got some monster arms on him too, and he's a strength coach and everything. I would say the incline curl seems to be the best developer for the long head of the biceps, because it keeps the tension on there and stretches that belly, and so your delt doesn't become the weak link as much. It's just this long head of the bicep. At least in my experience, that's what it was for me. I saw a lot of guys doing like one-arm curls and stuff in front of the mirror and standing and everything, and I found you do get some bicep development from that, but I find the brachialis comes in a lot more than the actual, the belly of the brachii itself. So if this brachii doesn't ever get stretched out, you don't get the necessary development that you would under those circumstances from just standing up, or doing hammer curls or something. Now, you get some good biceps and stuff, and because of my dislocated shoulder and everything, I had to kind of change my movements around and find, okay, what's true for me now, because now my shoulder's more unstable, so now putting myself in a stretch like this, it's kind of changed the dynamic of how my arms function. But at the same time, I still find if I really want to hit just bicep failure, the incline curl is the best. And gymnasts, they do that type of variation when they're hanging upside down like that, like I said. And
back to the chin-up, though. Like, what are some tips you can give people for
if they want to do biceps on chin-ups?
If they want to emphasize the biceps a little bit more.
Well, supinated grip, of course, and more narrow. That's what I would be doing, and then pulling up, to basically where they can, where they're getting full contraction of that bicep as much as possible, and then pulling down. But I would never recommend that they lock out at the bottom. This is the big thing I'm seeing a lot of people do on chin-ups and stuff, because they're so afraid somebody might think they're cheating. If you're locking out of the bottom and hanging there, I mean, that's a golfer's elbow just waiting to happen, or tennis elbow and stuff. And I've had a lot of people that has happened to, and I watched them do it. One client, actually, I was training, he was in great shape, but he kept on hanging down from the chin-up bar because he wanted that little rest in between reps. And I said, don't do that. Your elbow's going to get messed up. And, of course, 2 months later, he had golfer's elbow, and that took him about 2 or 3 months to get over, right? So the fact is that keeping that tension on the bicep and pulling up above the chin, above the bar, which is why when I'm doing pull-ups, a lot of guys are like, hey, you're doing them wrong. You're not pulling up above the bar. Well, it's like I don't want bicep development. I want back development from this. So I'm leaning back and just pulling so my chest is sticking out, but I'm not worried about my chin coming over the bar, right? Yeah. But yeah, no, it can be a good bicep developer for sure. I never found it was the best one for me, but yeah, depending on your dimensions, maybe it could work for some people.
Okay, so let's talk about probably one of my favorite muscles of all time, the tricep long head, right? So you have a lot of people who, they do the overhead dumbbell extension, you seated with the dumbbell, and they actually don't feel the tricep long head working at all. You feel mostly like the delts. And I'm one of those people, by the way.
Okay.
Now I feel it. But like I'm saying before, it took me a while to get to that point where the mind-muscle connection was there, because like more dominant muscles,
Yeah.
But what I'm noticing is that a lot of people who don't seem to have a tricep long head development at all, they don't feel the tricep long head working. They just don't feel the stretch. So what's your take on that? Like, what are some tweaks that someone can make to lift?
I watched your video on that, funny enough. I watched what you're doing, and I noticed you're coming down super low on in there. That's not something I would necessarily advocate for everyone, just because I noticed that the dumbbell extension overhead puts an exponential amount of stress on the elbow, as you know. I mean, your elbow, this is where it's going to take the most amount of stress in this position, right? So one thing that I found helps keep it on the long head is, once again, elbows in as much as possible when you come down. That's for my dimensions anyway, and for a lot of people that I've trained, maybe not you, or maybe, at the same time, this will also depend on your dimensions of humerus to radius or whatever. I think radius, yeah. So basically your upper arm and your forearm ratios, this will also make a difference. So if you're coming down and you're not feeling pressure in the elbow, then I'd say, by all means do that, and that's probably your situation where you're not feeling that because of the way you're built. But another way to do it, if somebody feels excessive pressure from here and they're coming down really low and they find so much pressure on the elbows, then I would say go to an incline instead. Go to an incline, and then what you do is you hang the dumbbell out, and so you don't have the elbows facing towards the ceiling, but you have them hanging back a little bit, and then basically you just keep that constant tension on the long head like this. Right? So I think that's another variation you could do. So yeah, it's a funny thing, because what works for one person will work for another person, but you have to kind of cater it to their dimensions depending on the situation. Because, like I said, my elbow joints would probably be on the ceiling if I did what you did with the elbow extension or with the tricep extension above. Like, but
Yeah.
I have my own situation. Like, I broke this arm when I was a kid, right? So I can hyperextend it, but I can't bend it all the way. So that's another also a factor that also comes into play about how, say, an overhead extension would affect me as opposed to you, right? So, yeah.
It's funny you said because what actually I don't want to like talk about me too much, but I had a lot of trouble feeling my tricep long head. And then when I started watching your videos and you're talking about using a range of motion that works for you, you know,
Mm-hmm.
full range of tension, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I've noticed that for me, like once my forearm touches my bicep on the overhead extension, I don't need to go any lower than that. And I've also found that from that point all the way up to lockout, I don't lock out the weight either.
No, good. Yeah,
So I have like a little it's still a pretty decent range of motion, you know,
yeah, yeah.
but that's where I feel the tricep long head working the most because I feel like if I lock it out, I just like obviously the lockout, you know, like joints are meant to lock out, you know,
Mm.
but I feel like it kind of takes the tension off the muscle, like when I lock
It does,
out.
because when you
For some
lock
weird
out,
amount.
and you come up above here, this is like you're not really getting much more extension. You're getting more internal rotation of the shoulders than you are extension of the tricep, right?
Mhm.
So that's what I was saying before, is that sometimes a movement you think, okay, there's just beginning and end. Well, it's not quite so simple. There's the beginning and then the end of the tricep extension, and then just to get that little bit more extension, you have to rotate the shoulders in. Now all of a sudden, the rotation of the shoulders in becomes another part of the exercise that may become the weak link and prevent you from taking the triceps deeper into failure. So it's whatever hits failure, you know? So what I think you're intuitively realizing is that when you stay with the tension during the ideal or impeccable range, what happens is the tricep actually hits failure instead of other things coming into play, which prevent the
Exactly.
tricep from hitting failure. Yeah.
No, it's a great feeling too, you know.
Yeah, yeah, no,
But
it is. Yeah.
okay, so we're pretty much done with the arm section. Let's talk about the delts, right? So let's talk about like lateral raise variations. You know, you talk to different bodybuilders all over the globe. Everyone's gonna say, "Oh, this lateral raise variation's the best." Like, which ones? Like, give me like your top three lateral raise variations that you're a big advocate of.
Well, I like side lateral raises. And the thing is, my arms, because my arms, the way they bend and stuff, it looks funny. It looks like I'm totally internally rotating, but I'm really not. I'm just basically doing what range of motion feels most natural to me. Like, I'm not trying to kind of twist it one way or the other, right? But what I find is that if I start coming up like this and bringing more of the front delt in it, it almost jams the bicep tendon. So I find it's not really good for my shoulders. I find it doesn't give me any extra development. If anything, it just becomes kind of grinding type feeling. Like it's never really felt right to me, even when I was a kid, right? So the fact is, I keep the palms towards the floor and just come up, right? I don't need to come up all the way like this and rotate in or anything, just like that. And I find there's a sweet spot where if you come up a little bit too high, then you notice that your traps become more the weak link instead of the delts. So I know you had a video on this, basically on your rear delts and stuff like that, and it's really true for the side too. You want to come up where it's like the side delts are actually hitting failure. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're coming up higher. Sometimes when you're coming up higher, you start to bring in more neck and stuff, and it's not necessarily going to hit your delts better, right? So I like the just standard side delt raise, but again, it's the same thing. You want to keep that tension on the side delt. You don't want to be coming down and resting and then up. You want to kind of keep that tension on there. The bend over lateral raise, I love on the incline bench. That's one of my favorite things too. I love the bent over lateral raise on an incline bench, because then I don't have to worry about swinging with my lower back or anything. I just focus on that rear delt and hitting failure. And I like to do the variation also with external rotation, and that might seem counterintuitive to some people. But the fact is, when you're doing external rotation, you start to work some of the external rotator cuff, and because that rotator cuff wraps around underneath the rear delt, it does help push that delt out. Actually needs some more soft delt development. Yeah. So yeah, I like sometimes doing some external rotation and then sometimes no external rotation at all to work the delts. But I find that if you include some rotator cuff stuff in there, it really does help the overall development of the delt.
Okay, so let's talk about the shoulder press now. And this is one thing I've been meaning to ask you.
Yeah.
It's that for years I was doing my shoulder presses with the dumbbells really close to my head, you know. So obviously you could lift a bit heavier. It's closer to your center of gravity. It's more bicep, forearm, and trap engagement. It's like the video you commented on, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And started studying a lot of bodybuilders and noticing how their fist was pretty much always lined up with their elbow.
Yeah.
In other words, the dumbbell was pretty far away from their head. The
Perpendicular.
dumbbell is further away from their center of gravity, you know. So
Perpendicular, yeah. Perpendicular.
exact perpendicular, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's more stretch on the side delt, It's not a Y press, but
Yeah.
they're pretty much out, you know?
It's what it is, and I think because I see exactly where your mind's going here. It's really the most efficient way to use the delt instead of the tricep. See, when you bring the arms in more like this, then the tricep becomes more the weak link, right? It
Exactly,
becomes
yeah.
because what happens is that now remember there's more angles that are changing in the elbow as opposed to the shoulder, right? So basically, what you want is the forearms to stay perpendicular to the floor, and then all the range is happening around the delt instead of the elbows coming in and out. If the elbows are coming in and out, then you're going to be working more tricep. And triceps are a smaller muscle group, and in the end, you will actually be weaker doing that usually than if you're actually using the whole, because you do bring in some upper chest a little bit on shoulders sometimes, like there, and that's really not necessarily a bad thing because sometimes upper chest is usually the thing that's lacking in most bodybuilders anyway, right? So I don't worry about doing a slight incline on the shoulder press. But the fact is that I find that if you keep the forearms perpendicular, you're going to hit failure in that shoulder because the shoulder is where all the angle is changing, right? All the angles are changing in the shoulder during the movement.
Especially for high reps, if you use like constant tension, you know?
Oh yeah, 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 100%, yeah.
So how low do you like to bring dumbbells on there?
Okay, so for me, I find that when you come down lower than ears, and I'm built like a midget, I guess you could say, but it just depends, right? Everybody's got their different dimensions. But when I come down, like say, here's where my elbows are, you can see. When I come down lower than this, I find the tension starts to leave the muscle, and I have to almost relax a bit in order to actually get it down past this point. It's almost like there's a catch point. And I find coming down here, yeah, I do work some delt. There is a stretch in there, but if I'm going to be using heavier weight, I don't feel like that's a safe zone. It seems like it's a zone where it starts to extend the bicep tendon and stuff a little bit too much, and I find it's not really a good zone for me to stay in. I find I'm better off using my joint integrity in this area, like say, nose level and then up, like that. That's where it seems like it keeps most of the tension on the muscle and it keeps it off the joint quite a bit. I find a lot of guys that have shoulder bursitis and stuff like that, they do the dumbbell bench press too low, or they do the shoulder press too low, or they're always having this joint pain in the shoulders. They're like, what's going on? I don't know why I'm getting this bursitis in there. Usually it's because they're going so low in their range of motion that they actually have to relax the muscle itself, and the muscle is what protects the joint. And if you have to relax the muscle itself in order to get down lower, that means that you're basically transferring that stress to the joint, and nothing will happen for a period of time until one day something does happen where you start to get a chronic inflammation or something like that, and then you're like, well, what happened, because it's usually a cumulative sort of effect of damage over time. You keep hammering that joint, and then all of a sudden one day you've got this flare up and you don't know where it came from.
So let's talk about the behind the neck press, right?
Okay.
So what are your thoughts on it for building up the delts overall and
So, sorry, Skype just blocked out again. Can you repeat the question?
yeah, so
Sorry.
what's your thoughts on the behind the neck press just for building up the delts and
I
they say
think
it
they're
hits the
pretty.
rear delts harder. Like, do you think the trade-off is worth it
I
for
think
most people?
I think if people have the maturity to do the range of motion that is right for them, then yeah. But if they're going to be, reading something in the comments on the internet and say you should touch your back of your neck and all this kind of stuff, and they're doing too excessive a range of motion, it's an extremely risky exercise. Like I know two guys that actually dislocated their shoulders from behind the neck press, and a dislocation shoulder it's a very serious injury, and it's an injury you never get over unless you do surgery. And I've never done surgery on my shoulder because it just doesn't seem worth the wait. And I've seen some people that come out of recovery, and it doesn't necessarily mean that their shoulder is better. It might not pop out, but then it's kind of like almost like a Frankenstein where it's not moving properly sometimes. So what I found that is with behind the neck press, if I came down to, there's a little bump on the back of your head. You might have it. I don't know if you have it or not, but I have one. And it basically touch there. So right, top of the ears or something like that, and then come up. I find that's usually a good range of motion. And at the same time, I'd stick to reps of 20 to 30, 40 reps. But is it useful? I think it's useful to stretch the delts a bit. So I guess it's kind of similar to doing a total vertical shoulder press because you are forced into more of a vertical position when you're doing behind the neck. Right? In that way, it can actually offer some result. And I do notice it does stretch the delt out a little bit better. But the risk, it depends on the maturity of the person doing it. It's not so risky if you're staying with lighter weight and you're working in a conservative range of motion. But if you're trying to touch the back of your neck way down here and stuff and come up, it could be quite a problem, I think, in some cases. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, just looking for the next question, but okay, so let's go more towards the lower body now, right? Chest, I didn't really have any questions, but let's talk about the calves, right? I see a lot of people who have like small calves and what are some tips you could give people? Because I know you have some pretty impressive calves yourself,
Do I?
and I know you
Oh,
like doing, yeah.
oh, really? Okay, I didn't know because my calves. The thing is, I kind of slacked on the calves a little bit because when I was playing hockey, I became really dumb on the ice when I trained calves. Because what would happen is you have to use your ankle stability to stabilize the skates and all the skating and everything, right? So the calves are already a small muscle group compared to the quads and the ass and everything else. So I get on the ice after training calves, and it was like I couldn't even skate barely. Like my calves were just burning so bad I couldn't even turn. I was falling down and everything. So I kind of got out of the habit of training a lot of calves. But now I'm training calves again, and I find that I like high reps of calves. It's amazing. Like some high rep calf workouts are actually more constructive than the heavier ones for some reason. And I don't know whether that's just the makeup of them or what they're designed to do, because calves are really primarily designed for jumping and also walking hills for long periods of time, right? So I guess there is not only is there power and springiness in there, like the gastrocnemius, but the soleus has a lot of endurance fibers in there. So I think you got to do, just like we do with all the other body parts, you have to do a combination of two types of techniques. Now, one technique that I found worked really well for me when my calves were at their peak, and they're not at their peak now, but what really worked for me well was I do 3 or 4 sets of calves, but after I do some jumping movements right after I fatigue them, and then I just tear them down by doing these small little jumping movements. Nothing too excessive, like you're not jumping off high blocks and stuff, because you will tear an Achilles tendon if you do that under the wrong circumstances, but just little jumps and stuff, because if you look at long distance runners or boxers and stuff, their calf development is pretty good because they do those little jumps for long periods of time, because they're always, jumping around the ring and stuff. So I find that that's an underestimated way of training the calves. I don't know if weight training is the best way to build calves. I think it's a great tool to use in conjunction with some plyometrics, and I think that's what's the best thing for building calves.
So for example, if someone were to do like some standing calf raises, like a single leg on a step or something.
Yeah.
Right after, you'd recommend like they could kind of superset it with like some jump roping.
Yeah, something like that would be great.
That.
Yeah, because I see some guys that skip rope. You're right; they just got the awesome calf development too, right? So, I think jumping along with the weight training, it's almost like it's like a synergy that happens. I don't know why, but my brother and I noticed this, and I put on like a half an inch of my calves in a period of 3 months doing that, which is crazy for me because I have the worst calf genetics, right? And my calves really came up once I started doing that. Now, here's the disclaimer though. You can overdo the jumping where you could totally flare up your Achilles tendon and everything. So you don't want to overdo it. But I think doing it once a week or once every 2 weeks or something like that is a really good addition to your calf training. I think that really helps. Now, the other thing I noticed, and this is something that I had this big debate with this guy that I know is a natural bodybuilder, and he was like, oh, people are stupid because they're just keeping the constant tension smaller reps. They should stretch all the way down. But stretching all the way down is different from person to person, of course, but you want to stretch so that the tension is on the actual calf, but it doesn't transfer to the Achilles tendon. If you're stretching down too low under weight and it's starting to transfer to the Achilles tendon, I think that puts an undue amount of stress on that tendon, and I think it's unnecessary. I don't think you need to stretch so far down that you're just stretching out that tendon as well. So I think there's going to be a sweet spot as well to keep that tension on the calf, but keep a lot of it off the tendon, right?
So you'd recommend doing the jumps when you're a bit more pre-exhausted?
Yeah, when you're pre-exhausted, then do the jumps. Yeah, that's the best time to do it. Yeah.
Okay, for like what, like 30 seconds?
Yeah, 30. You will bite it. You will fall down because, like you said, your legs aren't exactly the smartest after they've done a couple sets of calves or something. But then you just do these little jumps for 30 seconds to a minute, and it's just a great way to really hammer them right into deep failure. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. It's kind of like you're just squeezing all the, like you're already like super tired from the set you just did, then you just pretty much squeezing all the juice out of them with like just taxing, just murdering them with like the jumps, like.
Yeah, it's like a heavy eccentric, right? It's kind of like doing a forced negative, like a really heavy weight. It's because obviously it's the momentum you're trying to stop, but that momentum.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy actually, but that's why it's neat on the floor, right? Because if you notice, like your foot will be like this, or maybe there'll be a little bit of a, like say this is your leg, right, or your tibia, and this is your foot, and yeah, there'll be a little bit of flexion like this, but it's not so much flexion like a calf raise where you're risking injury, right? So if you're just doing little jumps on a flat surface, it's still a safe sort of range of motion as well. Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on people saying that like when you're doing a calf raise, you should kind of push off the pinky toe?
Okay, then what they're
What's your
trying to
take
do
on
is,
that?
I've never really believed in that. But I think it would be a way of hitting the outside of the calf a little bit. I can feel how that would be a way of hitting I can't remember the name of the muscle, but there's an external muscle that is on the outside of the calf, and it's a smaller one, but basically that would accentuate that a little bit more. Yeah, I think you would basically hit a different part of the calf. But I always felt like just the middle of the foot's the best, right, for me. But I think it just will depend on how your history is with your body and everything too. Like if you have flat feet or don't have flat feet, or because people have all sorts of feet, right? If you look at their feet, some people have just gnarled little toes and everything, and other people have
Mm.
pretty functional feet where their muscles are all functioning right in their feet. So there's all these different muscles underneath the foot too. Like there was these inserts, these foam inserts that I got for my shoe at one point that was really interesting, and I put them in my shoe, and it was almost like an exercise in the muscles on the inside of the foot. And I found that really actually changed the way my foot functioned as well, because I was born with flat feet, right? And I noticed that when you strengthen those muscles, because it really makes a difference in how your foot functions, even when you're doing calf raises or anything. So some people recommend that you take a towel and you roll the towel up with your toes and stuff like that. That will help, get those muscles going. Because we're in a society where our feet are always splinted, like they're in a cast. It's kind of like when you have a broken arm, you have a cast, and when your muscles atrophy. Well, because we wear shoes all the time, I think the shoes are kind of killing some of the muscles underneath our feet. We never really get a chance to use them, which is why I think some people are saying, get those shoes or those socks with the toes in them and stuff, and then you walk around the gym with those. I think that's the principle based on that. So when I was in martial arts doing a lot of karate and stuff, I noticed that my feet would feel different because I always had bare feet, and I was always, running, jumping, kicking, doing all these things with bare feet. And I think it does help a certain aspect of the body that bodybuilders don't really pay attention to too much. And I don't either, but it is something that does play a role sometimes in how you need to, something you need to take into effect, I guess, when you're doing calf raises, right? You might have some muscular imbalances in the foot itself, which will influence where you feel you need to put the pressure in order to get the calf properly activated.
Mm. No, for sure. Like some bodybuilders could for sure learn a bit more from, other walks of life, or
Yeah.
other like from other athletes, you rarely ever see bodybuilders doing the calf raises like with no shoes, or you barely ever see bodybuilders superset their calf raises with like jump rope, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And it's funny that you mentioned it too, because like a lot of people lack like work capacity too, So there's nothing wrong with like it's actually very beneficial from like a GPP like work capacity standpoint to throw in some jump rope in there too, because if you're looking for like bodybuilding goals, you're thinking, okay, well, I'm doing this as a cardio tool, but it's also going to get me bigger calves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing. It's just whatever works, right? It's like you try these different sort of things about how to add tension to a muscle, and yeah, you sometimes stumble across these, I guess, exercises that cross several worlds. They're in soccer as well as bodybuilding or something like that. So sometimes you can use some tools from other sports to accentuate your bodybuilding goals.
I think just like lifters in general should be more like just a little bit open to the different realms of fitness. You
Yeah, I
look at
think
like Olympic weightlifters, they have like amazing traps, amazing upper backs, and but you rarely ever see bodybuilders doing like high pulls or like snatch grip lifts.
mm,
You know, they just
mm,
stick to like the regular shrugs and like their rows, and it's great. They're still getting results, especially if they're on drugs. But like if you're drug free, like you have to do whatever it takes to get results. And if that means that you have to take like some unconventional methods to get from point A to point B.
yeah, no, for sure. It's like you got to basically be a revolutionary. You have to break out of the system that you're indoctrinated in, right? So every sport and every hobby has its own system. What's the accepted norm of what is done in that sport in order to achieve results? And anytime you go outside that norm, then you're ridiculed, or basically you face almost like a public persecution of some sort, right? Because they're like, hey, that's not what I read somewhere. That's normal, right? But you might be the big innovator, right? And the innovators always get ridiculed, right? Whenever you're an innovator and you discover something for the first time, before all the other sheep discover it too, you're basically the guy that's the idiot, right? But then later on, you're the genius. After they put dirt on your grave, and then you're the genius that innovated this new technique that really caused a whole revolution in how you train.
So we just talked about a couple of muscle groups, and I wanted to talk about just a little bit about nutrition, and we could wrap it up.
Okay. Well,
So
yeah, whatever you want to talk about, for sure.
so let's talk about like supplements, right? Obviously, as a drug-free lifter like yourself, you're not using like tests and all this other stuff. So you
No.
have to. It would be smart for guys like you to at least maximize your supplementation because it's a great tool that you could use that you're not going to be judged for it, when you show up at the bodybuilding show because you're allowed to use that kind of stuff. So, what do you think some good supplements are out there for that a lot of drug free lifters could benefit from?
Well, the thing
and
is,
why?
I've been out of the supplement game for quite a while, but although I do use branched chain amino acids quite a bit, I find that I like the taste of them. It's kind of like, bodybuilder Kool-Aid, right? I just like it. And I just like just the branched chains that are sweet with stevia. I don't need any of the caffeine in there because I get caffeine from coffee from time to time. But basically, I like branched chains because they give me energy, and I find it does help me use the protein that I get from my grain sources and other sources of food. The protein, some of those proteins. So I think
Hmm.
branched chains are a great tool to use to get energy and motivation to work out. Glutamine is a great thing to help with so many different systems in the body, such as concentration, digestive system. Also, of course, it's the most abundant amino acid in muscle tissue, so it's important to take as well. I haven't been taking that much. And the reason why I don't take a lot of supplements is just for one reason only. I find a lot of supplements make me retain a little bit of water, and then it's hard for me to tell whether my diet's working or not, whether, when I'm trying to get leaner or something. So that's one of the reasons why I've been kind of bad that way. I haven't been taking a lot of supplements, but the supplements that I do notice give me the best results are glutamine, the branched chain amino acids, and creatine to a point. Although creatine causes me to water over quite a bit because, of course, you get that intramuscular water retention as well as some of it spills on to the outside as well.
Hmm.
And of course, I like meal replacements more than protein shakes, and the reason why is because they just taste better, and I find just having a little bit of carbs and the protein together just seems like it's better for my digestion than just straight protein. Although I will take straight protein from time to time. Now, there's a few other supplements in the market right now that I have not experimented with, but are supposed to be 100% natural and are very good for you. So my brother's more the expert. He's a naturopathic doctor in this. He's kind of the guy that has all the up-to-date research on everything and what happens in the body. And him and I are actually talking right now about possibly formulating, a natural bodybuilding line at some point and seeing where that will go. So we'll see. Yeah. So I
Hmm.
still have a lot to learn in that area. Supplementation has come a long ways in the last 10 years as well. There's all these different things that are going on. So yeah, that's really the main thing that I use is just glutamine, branched chains, and a little bit of protein and creatine from time to time.
What about pre-workouts? Like, what's your thoughts on them? And what are some good alternatives? What are your thoughts on coffee?
I like coffee. I mean, I don't know if it's the best thing in the world, but I like it. But at the same time, the pre-workouts that have a lot of that chemical type of caffeine in them, I'm not sure the chemical type caffeine is really the same as the stuff that's in coffee. I've read some research on that, and they say it's a chemical synthetic caffeine. So I think there's something to be said for that. Using synthetic type stuff is not going to be quite as healthy, I don't think. The pre-workouts too that just basically stimulate you like crazy with all the nervous system stimulants and stuff like that. I don't really like taking. They will increase your workout capacity, no doubt. Like caffeine and stuff will stimulate you and get you going. And but I just prefer to use more natural sources like just coffee or tea or something like that instead of a pre-workout. My pre-workout, I'd rather just use a natural, just branched chains in there and some stevia, and that's about it. But I don't really like to add stimulants to it, just because I just don't know what type of stimulants they're putting in there. It's not necessarily the same stuff you find in your coffee or your tea in some cases, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah.
What are your doses of coffee like on average? And like
I,
also, how long you been like taking coffee for? Because if you've been taking it for, say, you've been training 30 years,
oh yeah, I've been
what
drinking
is your
coffee.
coffee? What does your coffee intake look like now compared to?
Oh, same. It's the same. Yeah, I have 2 or 3 cups a day or whatever, and I like mochas and stuff. That's kind of like my treat. I'll have a non-fat mocha. There's a little bit of sugar in there and stuff, and some
Hmm.
espresso, right? So I'm an espresso junkie. I like espresso, so I'll have a couple of those a day, and then, But if I'm on a hardcore cut, then I'll just have, a cup of straight coffee or something like that. But I won't have any sort of milk or sugar type stuff anymore. If I'm on a hardcore cut, at that point I cut that out, right? Obviously, because the sugar and stuff in there.
Of course, of course.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, just a couple a day. Yeah. Sometimes more. Sometimes I'll drink the instant organic coffee. Instant coffee is probably not the best for you. So I try to limit that too. So I've kind of went more to tea lately and stuff, like just because I like teas. I like all these things. I don't know if it's really a bodybuilding supplement as much as it just is my own sanity because I'm not really eating a lot of ice cream or pizza or any sort of deviations of my diet. I'm trying to eat pretty clean in my diet. So, my treat, I just kind of look for, tea or something like that. I like different types of tea. I use stevia as a sweetener and stuff and just a tiny bit of milk in there and then I'm good to go. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So that was pretty much the last question of the Q&A. So hope you
Cool.
guys
Cool.
all enjoyed it. Went over a couple body parts, a little bit of nutrition, talking about some drug-free lifting with Jason. So you have anything else to say or?
No, that's about it. Thanks a lot for having me on here and stuff. And it was great talking to you. Yeah.
Nice, man.
Yeah, we'll
So
do
a
it
little
again.
message, I want all the audience to understand that, look, you can learn a bit from everybody, and if you guys like this Q&A, you can check out his channel. I'll put the link in the description. And yeah.
Perfect, man. Great.
All right, so
Cool.
stay in touch, man. Have a good day, man.
Yeah. We'll do that. Yeah, we'll stay in touch. So now you edit this, right?